No one expected a 12-year-old Vietnamese-American boy named Minh to interrupt a nationally televised panel hosted by Maye Musk. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even speak, at first. But what he did next silenced a billionaire, stunned an entire studio, and exposed a truth no one saw coming. Before the cameras cut to commercial, Maye Musk would be forced to do something she's never done on live television. Apologize before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The camera panned slowly across the brightly lit stage, landing on Maye Musk as she adjusted the mic clipped to her white blazer. The crowd hushed. A digital backdrop behind her flickered to life, displaying a graph titled AI Bias in Predictive Health Models. She smiled, poised, and practiced, ready to walk the audience through her keynote. But just as she began her opening sentence, a small hand raised from the third row. It was subtle at first. A boy, perhaps no older than 12, stood up quietly, his navy windbreaker far too big for his thin frame. The audience barely noticed him until he took a step forward and pointed, without saying a word, at the screen behind Maye. She paused, mid-sentence. A producer leaned forward in the control booth. Cameras hesitated. On the screen, the lower quadrant of the graph blinked. Then again. "Excuse me," the boy said finally, his voice quiet but clear. "There's a calculation error in the training sample. Row 6 is duplicated. The output is biased." For a moment, the room didn't breathe. Maye blinked. The crowd looked at her, waiting. She turned back to the screen. The chart flickered, then corrected itself, just as the boy had said. Laughter rippled nervously from a few rows. "Are you a data scientist now?" Maye asked, light-hearted but cool. The boy didn't answer. He only looked at her, steady and calm. One of the co-hosts leaned forward at the panel table. "What's your name, kid?" "Minh," the boy replied. "Minh Tran." "And how old are you, Minh?" 12. More laughter, louder this time, mixed with a few gasps. Maye smiled politely, the kind of smile that only just covered a shift in posture. "Well, Minh," she said, "since you're clearly more advanced than our algorithm, would you like to join us up here and help explain your discovery?" There was sarcasm, but only just enough to maintain control. Minh didn't flinch. He nodded and walked down the aisle, past rows of stunned audience members. The camera followed him as he climbed the stage stairs without looking back. He didn't seem nervous. Didn't shuffle his feet. Didn't blink much. He simply stood next to Maye, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the data as if the room weren't watching him at all. In the control room, someone whispered, "What's he doing here?" Another voice replied, "He came with a school group. We thought he just liked STEM." No one moved as Minh reached for the presenter's digital stylus. Maye turned slightly, not stopping him, but not stepping aside either. And without asking for permission, the boy began to draw. Not over her slides, but next to them. A parallel graph. A cleaner model. An equation at the bottom, annotated in shorthand. No wasted motion. No excess lines. When he stepped back, the system paused. Recalculated. Maye looked down at it. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. The silence lingered longer than anyone expected. Minh didn't ask for applause, didn't turn to look at the stunned faces behind him. He simply placed the stylus back on the podium and stepped aside, as if his part was finished. But it wasn't. The lead moderator, an industry podcaster with a sharp voice and sharper ego, leaned into his mic and chuckled. "Well, that was unexpected," he said, gesturing toward the corrected data. "Impressive, Minh. Though I'm sure our systems were going to catch that error eventually." A few in the crowd laughed with him. Not all. Just enough. Minh didn't react. He stood still, hands folded behind him, eyes on the recalculated graph that now glowed across the stage wall. Maye remained quiet beside him, eyes narrowing just slightly. The moderator continued, "Where'd you learn that, Minh? YouTube? Or did ChatGPT give you a cheat sheet?" This time the laughter was louder. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the boy's stillness. He didn't smile. Didn't look hurt. Just quiet. Watching. Then he walked back to the screen. No invitation. No nod of permission. He tapped the lower left corner. The visualization shifted. Minh had activated a secondary view, hidden beneath the default panel. A deeper model, visible only to someone who knew the software intimately. The room tensed. He pointed again. This time not to a mistake, but to a predictive loop that had been silently skewing results by anchoring on the same control variable. No one, not even the researchers, had mentioned it. The moderator cleared his throat. "Okay, I think we've seen enough." Maye raised a hand gently, stopping him. "Let him finish," she said, her voice calm but firmer than before. Minh didn't look at her. He annotated the algorithm silently. 3 strokes. 1 correction. The screen reprocessed. The results adjusted. From the back of the room, a woman in a navy pantsuit, clearly a program director, turned to her assistant. "Who vetted the dataset?" "They did," the assistant whispered. "I don't even know how he accessed that view." Unstage, Minh stepped back once more. Still no words. Just the quiet assertion of a child who understood he was right and didn't need to argue about it. The crowd didn't know whether to clap. So they didn't. Instead, someone whispered near the front row, "He's not normal." Not in fear. In awe. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't even blinking. It wasn't arrogance. It was precision. Composure. The kind people aren't born with. Or maybe only a few are. Maye glanced sideways at him. Her expression unreadable. Not dismissive. Not impressed yet, either. But watching now. Closely. The moderator leaned away from his mic. Minh stepped down from the stage. Quietly. No flourish. He returned to the third row and sat in the same chair he had stood for minutes before. One leg tucked under the other. Arms crossed softly. His eyes never left the data on screen. He wasn't there to be famous. He was there because something was wrong. And he couldn't not fix it. Maye adjusted the lapel of her blazer as the moderator tried to steer the conversation back on track. But something in her posture had changed. Not stiff. Not defensive. Just sharper, like a scalpel rather than a spotlight. She turned slightly toward Minh, who still sat in the third row, small against the studio lights, elbows on the armrest, chin resting lightly on his hand. Not defiant. Not eager. Just present. Maye tapped the screen with the stylus. The graph vanished, replaced by a dense matrix of neural weights. "Minh," she said, her tone measured, "if you're as observant as you seem, perhaps you'd like to explain what the backpropagation pattern here is failing to resolve." Her voice carried through the room like a soft violin string drawn tight. The moderator leaned back. A camera shifted angles. Minh stood without hesitation. Not rushed. Not hesitant. He walked to the edge of the stage, hands in his pockets. Eyes on the data, not on her. There was a long pause. Long enough for the audience to wonder if he'd misheard the question. Then he spoke. "You've over-regularized the final layer," he said. "The system's bias variance trade-off is locked because your dropout rate's masking edge case features." Silence fell again. A man in the technical pit exhaled audibly. Someone in the second row muttered, "Jesus." Maye arched an eyebrow, but didn't flinch. She tapped again. A new slide appeared, an abstract simulation of medical diagnostic probability across racial data lines. "And what would you propose," she asked, "to mitigate latent bias in this environment without skewing the ROC curve?" A second pause. Minh took the stairs slowly this time. Walked past the moderator. Past the co-panelists. He stood next to the screen and studied the simulation as if the answer were buried under the light itself. He lifted the stylus and circled 3 points across the heat map. "Drop this node," he said. "You've trained it on a demographic with synthetic variables and no socioeconomic anchor. It's contaminating every downstream signal." The simulation blinked. The node disappeared. Everyone froze. The ROC curve adjusted. Quiet again. Not stunned this time. Not confused. Respectfully quiet. Maye stepped back a half pace. Not yielding the stage. Just giving space. She tilted her head. And how do you know this? She asked. No longer smiling. Minh looked at her for the first time that day. I watch, he said. And I remember. That was all. The moderator opened his mouth, then closed it again. A buzz of static crackled softly in the studio speakers. Not broken. Just picking up breath. Maye glanced at the screen, then at Minh. I see, she said. She didn't. Not fully. Not yet. But something in her eyes, the smallest flicker, said she knew this wasn't over. The room remained still. Not one laugh. Not one cough. Outside the frame, behind the cameras, a network producer whispered into his headset, "Do not cut to commercial." The boy hadn't raised his voice. But he had raised the bar. Minh didn't answer Maye's next question. He didn't even look at her. Instead, he walked toward the screen as if drawn by gravity itself, his shadow stretching under the bright stage lights. The room went so quiet that the faint hum of the cameras became the loudest sound. He picked up the stylus, flipped it in his hand once, and without a single word began erasing lines of code from the projected model. At first, the audience thought he was guessing. A nervous laugh came from the third row. The moderator shifted in his seat, muttering something off mic to a producer. But then Minh's hand moved with deliberate precision, line by line, node by node, cleaning the architecture like someone who had seen its flaws long before anyone else. He wasn't rewriting the data. He was reorganizing its logic. On the fourth stroke, the system beeped, recalculating. A glowing line of text appeared, processing correction. Maye's expression hardened slightly, but her eyes stayed on the screen. She could feel the shift in the air, the way hundreds of people suddenly leaned forward, the way silence pressed against the walls. Minh wrote 3 more characters, tapped the stylus on the edge of the board, and stepped back. The entire matrix blinked, resolved, and then displayed a predictive accuracy curve the panel had never achieved before. Someone in the back of the studio gasped. "That's not possible," whispered a data engineer from the production team. "He just solved a quantum modeling error we've been chasing for months." The moderator half laughed, half choked, his microphone picking up a sharp breath. Wait, did he just? He stopped, because he had no words. The camera operators, trained to follow Maye, slowly adjusted their focus toward Minh. Every lens found him now. The lights dimmed slightly, not because anyone adjusted them, but because the room felt smaller, as if the moment itself had closed in. Minh didn't smile. He didn't look proud. He simply placed the stylus back in its holder and returned to the center of the stage. His movements were slow, unhurried, the kind of calm that made people realize this wasn't a fluke. The silence stretched long enough that the director in the control booth leaned toward his assistant and whispered, "What just happened? Keep rolling. Do not cut." Maye finally spoke, her voice steady but softer than before. "You understand this model?" Minh's gaze met hers for a fleeting second. He nodded once. Then he crouched slightly, picked up a loose sheet of notes from the floor, notes that belonged to one of the panelists, and began sketching a small diagram on the back. He worked like a boy drawing shapes in the sand, except each stroke was calculated, layered, perfect. He finished in less than 20 seconds and handed the paper to Maye. She looked at it and felt something strange, a flicker of recognition mixed with disquiet. The drawing wasn't just a fix. It was an entirely new framework. From the audience, someone whispered, "He's rewriting everything." A murmur rippled across the room. Phones came out. A few audience members were already recording, knowing they were witnessing something rare. Maye held the paper for a long moment. She looked up, studying the boy in front of her. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a quiet seriousness. For the first time in her career, on a stage she'd owned completely, she felt like a guest. And Minh? He simply stepped back, hands at his sides, waiting. The stage lights burned brighter, casting sharp outlines on every face. No one moved, waiting for Maye's next question, waiting for the boy to falter. But Minh didn't falter. He walked closer to the screen again, his gaze fixed on the cascading numbers and tangled lines of code like a surgeon examining an open wound. He reached for the stylus, and this time Maye didn't stop him. She simply lowered her hand and let him take the space. The screen was crowded with layers of equations and predictive charts, too dense for most viewers to understand. Minh tilted his head, scanning line by line. The audience could hear the faint hum of the servers backstage, the cameras adjusting focus, the restless shifting of people who didn't understand what they were witnessing. Then, without a word, he began to erase. Not in anger, but with precise movements, stripping out entire sections of the model. The graphs blinked, stuttered, then collapsed into raw data. A technician in the control booth muttered something unintelligible, staring at his monitor as if the boy had cracked open the core of the system. A hush settled over the room. The moderator, who had been leaning on his elbow, slowly sat upright, his smirk evaporating. "What is he doing?" someone whispered near the front row. "He's rewriting the model," answered a man in a grey hoodie, who turned out to be one of the software engineers. His voice shook. "No one has been able to simplify that module without breaking it. We've been stuck for months." The boy ignored them all. He drew 3 clean lines across the screen, linking nodes in a pattern that no one had considered. Then he added a single equation, simple but elegant, like a final stroke on a painting. He stepped back, still silent. The screen flickered once, then recalibrated. The model stabilized. The predictive error rate, displayed in the corner, plummeted from 32% to 6%. The crowd gasped collectively, not because they fully understood, but because they could see the numbers. They didn't lie. One of the co-hosts tried to laugh it off. "Well, I guess our fancy AI just got outsmarted by a middle schooler," he said, but his voice cracked mid-sentence, betraying his unease. Maye turned toward Minh, her expression unreadable. Not anger. Not even surprise. Something else. A quiet, careful respect forming beneath her composure. The cameras zoomed in on the boy's face. He wasn't smiling, wasn't seeking approval. He just watched the numbers settle on the screen as if confirming that the world now made sense again. From somewhere behind the cameras, a voice whispered, "What just happened?" Another voice, trembling, replied, "He just solved a quantum modeling error we've been chasing for months." Maye took a slow breath, one hand resting lightly on the podium. She looked at Minh, studying him the way a painter studies a masterpiece that shouldn't exist, and yet does. The audience was frozen, 100 eyes fixed on this quiet 12-year-old who had just done what seasoned engineers had failed to do. There was no applause, not yet. Only silence, thick and absolute, as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Minh turned the stylus over in his hand, set it down, and walked back to his seat without looking at anyone. The screen still glowed with his solution, a clean, unshakable truth written by hands too young for anyone to believe, and yet impossible to ignore. The clip hit the internet before the studio lights had even cooled. A backstage assistant had posted 20 seconds of raw footage to a private story. But someone's screen recorded it. Then someone else reposted it. Within 30 minutes, Minh Tran's name was trending on 3 platforms. By the end of the hour, the phrase 12-year-old rewrites predictive AI model sat atop a national search bar like a flare in the digital sky. It wasn't just the footage. It was the silence. The moment after the graph corrected. The pause before Maye spoke. The way the boy never looked proud, never asked for attention. He just saw something broken, and fixed it. Phones buzzed across campuses, think tanks, and research centers. A Harvard professor watching from Cambridge called the production line mid-recording. His voice cracked through the studio intercom before a stagehand could mute it. "Who is that boy?" he asked, breathless. "Get me his contact. Now." In California, a senior engineer at Meta replayed the clip 7 times. He recognized the diagram Minh had drawn, an abandoned theoretical framework once dismissed as impossible to implement. And yet the numbers on screen were real. By the next segment, Minh was back in the 3rd row. Not invited to stay. Not dismissed either. He sat quietly, arms folded, eyes watching a new pain list try to continue the show as if nothing had happened. Maye hadn't spoken since the last question. The moderator forced a smile, pushing the next topic forward. But even his rhythm had cracked. Words fell flatter. Jokes didn't land. His notes trembled in his hand. And then came the email. A producer slipped a tablet to Maye during a brief pause. She read it. Blinked. It was from the Department of Education. Subject Minh Tran. Potential classification: gifted exceptional. Unregistered. Requesting follow-up. She set the tablet down slowly. Looked again at the boy. This time not as a novelty. Not even as a prodigy. But as someone who had walked into her world and rearranged the furniture without asking. She spoke his name quietly.
Minh.
He looked up. Do you know what you've just done? He didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head, thoughtful. Then, after a beat, I just wanted the numbers, to be honest. That was all. No slogans. No ambition. Just clarity. A woman in the front row, a venture capitalist who had mentored half the room's startups, leaned forward, whispering to her colleague, "We're watching the beginning of something. And none of us are ready for it." Minh didn't seem aware of the world outside that stage. Or maybe he did. He just didn't care about the noise. Backstage, a dozen calls were being routed to the show's producer. Tech firms. Schools. Journalists. Foundations. But on stage, it was quiet again. Maye folded her hands. She leaned slightly forward in her chair, elbows on the table, gaze fixed on the boy as if seeing not just what he was, but what the rest of the world had missed. This wasn't a moment. It was a correction. And it came from the last place anyone had been looking. Maye sat motionless, her fingers laced together on the desk in front of her. The lights no longer felt like hers. The stage she had commanded for decades felt narrower now, as if the floor itself had drawn in, leaving less room to stand tall. Minh hadn't spoken again. He didn't need to. His silence filled the studio with more authority than any keynote ever had. The moderator shifted awkwardly, glanced at his cue cards, then quietly placed them face down. The camera operators, once fluid and reactive, now held their angles like statues, afraid to disrupt what had become something more sacred than spectacle. Maye's eyes remained on Minh. He had returned to his seat again, legs folded beneath him like it was the most natural place to be. He didn't look smug. He didn't look curious. He just watched, patiently, as if waiting for the room to catch up. And now, Maye understood. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know that the stage had shifted, not by force, not by rebellion, but by clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't demand to be heard. It simply exists, and everything else adjusts. She leaned back, took a breath, and let it sit in her chest. When she finally moved, it was slow. Purposeful. She reached up and unpinned the mic from her collar, the soft click echoing louder than any word. Then she stood. There was no announcement. No line of dialogue. No performance. She walked to the front of the stage and paused beside the podium. Her heels clicked once, then stopped. The screen behind her still held Minh's revised framework. It hadn't been cleared yet. No one dared touch it. She turned toward Minh. The spotlight softened, as if in deference. The studio dimmed naturally, not by command, but by rhythm. Maye stepped down from the platform and began walking toward the third row. The audience parted slightly as she approached, unsure of what she was doing but unwilling to interrupt. Every breath felt like a held note. Minh looked up. His posture didn't change. Maye stopped directly in front of him. For the first time all day, she bent slightly at the waist and lowered her head. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just enough. Enough to be seen. A breath caught somewhere in the back of the room. A camera clicked, unplanned. She didn't say the words. Not yet. She didn't have to. The silence said them for her. She reached out, not to shake his hand, but to hand him something. A small wireless tablet used to operate the main board. Her own access panel. He took it, hesitated for the briefest moment, then gave a small nod. No smiles. No victory. Just an exchange. She returned to the stage, slower now, lighter somehow, like something had been lifted. Back at her chair, she sat without the mic. She wouldn't speak again during this segment. Instead, Minh stood, tablet in hand, He walked to the screen and tapped the lower right corner. The display shifted. Not to something complex. To something clean. Understandable. Translatable. The audience watched as he annotated, in real time, a method of bias correction simple enough for a sixth grader to follow. No code. Just logic. Ethics in visual form. And Maye, silent, hands folded, watched him teach. Minh stepped back from the screen. The last annotation faded into place, and the model pulsed quietly in soft green light, a final signature without a name. He didn't turn for applause. He didn't wait for approval. He simply set the tablet down at the base of the podium, hands still steady, shoulders relaxed. The boy had done what he came to do. No music cued. No wrap-up segment. The moderator sat frozen, staring at the display like it had just spoken a language he'd never studied. Someone backstage reached for the transition button, then stopped, unsure whether cutting away now would be an act of disrespect. Minh turned toward the audience. Not to bow. Not to perform. Just to look. Row by row, people met his gaze. No one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because it felt too sacred. Too soon. Like applauding would break something delicate that had just been rebuilt. Then Maye stood again. Not with urgency. With understanding. She met him halfway across the stage. Their height difference was striking. Her silver hair against his black. Her tailored blazer and heels beside his school hoodie and sneakers. But in that moment, they looked oddly aligned. She extended her hand. He didn't shake it. Instead, he looked her in the eye. And spoke the only words he would say that day. Don't forget who the models are built for. It wasn't said with defiance. It was a reminder. A truth. A sentence that echoed louder than any thesis ever could. Then he turned. Walked off the stage. No escort. No headline. No fanfare. Just footsteps across the studio floor and the quiet sound of a door opening somewhere off camera. Maye didn't follow. She watched. Not just him, but everything he left behind. The stillness. The recalibrated screens. The eyes of an audience no longer sure who they were supposed to admire. The camera lingered on her face. Not in defeat. In reflection. She stepped back to the center of the stage, looked into the lens, and whispered into her unpinned Uzi, not to be heard, but to release it. I understand now, she said. Then she set the mic on the table. The crowd didn't move until he was gone. Then, slowly, one by one, they stood. Not because they were told to, but because the moment demanded it. A young intern backstage leaned close to the director. Was that supposed to happen? The director didn't answer. He just kept watching the boy on the exit monitor, walking down a hallway that led to no green room, no press junket, no waiting limo. Only a quiet door. And light behind it. The last shot followed him from behind. The final frame landed not on Maye. Not on the screen. But on the back of a 12-year-old boy in a navy hoodie, his hands in his pockets, walking into a future none of them could yet define. Fade to black.